welcome everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. Today we have a very special show. Our guest, Andrew Matthews, has sold more than 8 million books with titles like Follow Your Heart, How Life Works, and Happiness in Hard Times. Today, we chat about his latest book, Bouncing Back, How You Rebound from Disappointment and Disaster. So with that, let's get Andrew on the air to chat about this essential topic. Andrew Matthews, welcome to the next chapter with
Charlie. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
I guess we should tell everybody you're not from the States.
I'm in far north Queensland, in the northeastern corner of Australia.
How many people are there, Andrew? Is that like 12 of you, or is it a whole bunch?
Cairns is one of the bigger towns in Australia.
Right.
We have about 125,000 people. But of course, our big cities in Australia are really very big. Sydney and Melbourne have over 4 million.
Okay.
And then we've got Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, which are between 1 and 2, maybe.
Are you close to Cairns?
I'm on a beach, a tropical beach, about 20 minutes north of the Cairns airport.
Bummer.
I travel a lot. I do a lot of corporate presentations, and when I come home, I can be on the beach.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I saw that you did that on your website. It mentioned you did over, is this right, over 1,000 business presentations?
Yes, it is. It sounds like a lot, but I'm older than I look. I've been speaking to corporations for 30 years now, Charlie, and that all happened after my first book, Being Happy, started to get some traction around the world. And back when Being Happy first came out, there were very few books around about happiness, and certainly none of them had cartoons in them.
Oh, your cartoons, and you do all the drawing, all the illustration on your...
I do. I fell in love with drawing and cartooning long before I tested whether or not I could write a book.
They're wonderful, and the quotes, you are so quotable. Man, they're powerful. Why don't we do that? Why don't we just jump into a couple of Andrew Matthews quotes and that I picked up from a video on your website that fascinated me. So there are 2 different quotes, but I think they may be intertwined somehow. I'd like to start the show with you giving us whatever comes to your mind when you think on these quotes. The first one, it is not failure that crushes us, it is never having tried. The second one is, how does one make an ordinary life into an extraordinary life? And you said, stop complaining focus on what you can do. You don't find the perfect job or the perfect life. You create it. Talk to me about those 2 things.
Okay, first one, it's not failure that crushes us. What hurts most is never having tried. When we get to 85 years old, chances are we're not going to sit around worrying about the things that didn't work. We're more likely to think about the things that we could have done, the vacations we could have taken, the people we could have told that we love them but we didn't. We'll be thinking about maybe that girl in Starbucks we met but never asked on a date. Maybe we'll be thinking about the times that we could have spoken up in defense of ourselves or to help someone else. It's not failure that is going to fill our minds at the age of 85. It's the things that we didn't do and the realization that we could have lived more fully. So that's what that quote's about. And how many of us say, this is the website that I almost built, or this is the book that I could have written?
You mean like the book I'm writing right now? For the last 2.5 years, it is not really written at all.
Charlie, send me what you've got, and let's chat about it.
Oh, I would love to. Are you kidding?
No, I'm serious. Deadly serious.
Oh,
deadly serious.
And I will take you up on it. So
okay.
I'm realizing I misquoted
That's a
this.
deal.
I will absolutely take you up on that. It's wonderful. Now, I misquoted this thing. How does an ordinary life and an extraordinary life, what is the real quote on that? I missed that quote up when I typed it in my notes.
It seemed roughly okay. So the essence of it is, number one, stop complaining. Here's the thing. Obviously, we think about what we talk about, and we talk about what we think about. Now, a lot of, if I think about food, then I'm going to be talking about food. But the reverse is also true. If I'm talking about something that worries me, then I spend my alone time thinking about it, and I'm unhappier, which is a very good reason not to complain. So that's number one. Number two is that there's a lot of things that perhaps we can't do at the moment because of where we live, or because we're taking care of children, or because we don't have the ideal job. But if we begin from the point of view of saying, what can I do? What is it possible for me to do? The story that I quote in relation to this in my new book, Bouncing Back, Charlie, is the story of Nick Vujicic, who is the man who was born with no arms and no legs. And he was relentlessly bullied in high school. He tried to commit suicide. He tried to drown himself in the bath when he was about 10.
Really?
As he got into his teens, still with the thought that, what am I possibly good for? I just seem to be the butt of people's jokes. Who will ever want me? Who will ever employ me? Nick began to ask himself, what is it that I can do? Forget about the things that I can't do as someone who has no arms and no legs. And he thought, what I can do is inspire people with my story. And he wrote to 70 other schools and said, can I come and share my story? I'm a kid with no arms and no legs, but I think I can inspire your other students. And everybody said no, not interested. But he began talking. Yes. But he began talking to church groups, and then he began talking to larger groups. And by the time he was a young old adult, he was filling stadiums. Nick Vujicic has now written about 6 international best-selling books, and he is one of the world's highest paid public speakers. And he lives in your country. He was born, I think, in Melbourne. And it all started when Nick said to himself, let me quit worrying about what I can't do. Let me focus on what I can do.
That's an amazing story. I wonder, yesterday, talking about looking at what you can do, I have a friend who is an executive coach, and she's also a shaman. And so she approaches life from a shamanistic point of view. And if you were to ask me, what does that mean? I'm not sure what shamanistic means, but I am sure that she has such an impact. And what she does is she has this process that's called the Genius Lab. This is, some of our listeners may recognize Taryn Voget, who's been on the show a couple of times. And what she does in the Genius Lab is she helps you identify what she calls your genius, which in other languages, what are your best skills, and how are you using those? How are you geniusing those in your life? And we went through this process that was just brilliant. She is, I credit the podcast to her, because in a conversation that I had with her when I first met her, she said, you're an interviewer. You need to do a podcast. And that started this show, and now she has me on another engagement where I don't want to get into the subject, it's just too deep, but that I may be entering, at 75, re-entering the public speaking arena. But that is looking at what I can do. And I don't, not focusing on that I'm 75 and that's a barrier. That's actually an opportunity.
Wonderful.
So I am very interested in your new book, Bouncing Back. And I have to say that the illustrations, as we've already said, are just amazing. And you have, I think it's even before the first chapter, the page before the first chapter, you have another quote, and as I said, you're so quotable. What you thought was breaking you is probably making you. And that is isn't that the heart of bouncing back, more of an optimistic, opportunistic view of failure and trouble and disappointment, and as you said in your title, disaster? Talk to me about that quote. I love that quote. What you thought was breaking you is probably making you.
Oh, it encapsulates the idea behind the book Bouncing Back, and that is that we're not born extraordinary. We become extraordinary by facing challenges we didn't choose. Even little challenges often turn out to be in our favor. And so often we come across what we think is a disaster, like we get bumped off a flight and then we have to wait in the airport 2 hours, and we get on the next flight and we sit next to somebody that changes our life, or we apply for a job that we thought was ours and we should have got it for a lot of different reasons and we don't. And 6 months later we say, isn't it good that I didn't get that job? Mm-hmm. Or maybe we fall in love with someone, Charlie, and we think, this is my lifelong partner, and they dump us. And we meet them 10 years later and we take a deep breath and say to ourselves, I dodged a bullet. Often what we think is a disaster turns out to be not a total disaster or even in our favor. So if I can explain to the listeners that quote, what you thought was breaking you is probably making you, is accompanied by a cartoon of a guy climbing a mountain, and he's exhausted and sweating, and his dog is exhausted and sweating. And it is encapsulating that idea that when we think we're at the end of our tether and that everything is going wrong and we can't go any further, it might just be going right.
I love that. Yesterday, Taryn and I were talking about fear and anxiety and even being terrified of something. She said, what terrifies you also excites you. And what terrifies you often is great opportunity. Now, how true is that of public speaking, that people are afraid of public speaking? Fortunately, I've had a lot of public speaking, but there is I've been out of it for a decade, so re-entering, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, am I going to be any good? Will people be interested? Do I have a subject that's interesting? Can I deliver anymore? And then it would be so easy to say, nah, I'm happy, I'm contented, I have the resources I need to live a happy retired life, but that is not what I feel I'm called to do. I don't think that's what I'm born to do. What I'm meant to do is I'm meant to be a contributor of good and optimism in life.
I'm with you, Charlie, and my other thought is that the more engaged we are and the more relevant we are to those people around us, and the more we're trying to make their lives better and in the process make our lives better, then the more connected we stay and the richer our life is. And the converse of that is those people we know that retire, and okay, they've worked hard for maybe 40 years, but they become very different people when they disconnect. And suddenly they're taking 10 minutes to tell you a story that a year ago they would have told you in 1 minute. And they get stressed out about little things that don't matter, a dog that's crapping on their lawn, or who knows what.
Yeah.
My thought is never retire. Even if we retire from a formal job, that we stay connected and engaged.
Yeah, I when I did retire, and what I mean by retire is I no longer work for money. It's just I'm in a place where that's not essential, and I can always use more money. I'm not saying that, but I work for passion. I work for making a difference. And my life is consumed with that, and I'm also very consumed with contemplative theology, mystics, and so I spend a lot of silent time praying and contemplating. But these are things, Andrew, I started even before I retired. I so agree with you that there's this change, this idea that when I retire, I quit doing everything, and then they've never practiced at doing anything else. So what do they end up doing? Watching TV or maybe golfing? But there's not been any rehearsal for living a meaningful life. And I think that's what your books, it feels to me that that's what you were talking about, is creating a habit, leading a happy, productive, meaningful, wonderful life. That is a habit that when you do, air quotes, retire or whatever you want to call that, your life is still full.
Yes. And part of making our life full, and you asked me the question, and I think I wandered off in some direction, but you were talking about the three principles of bouncing back. How is it? And all of us are bouncing back from something, whether we're bouncing back from eating too much or spending too much, or from a promotion that we thought we were going to get, or a relationship that started out well but didn't end well. So all of us are bouncing back from something. So how do we bounce back? And the first thing is acceptance. I think there's a misconception, maybe a myth, that says if you're living someplace you don't like, or something's happened you don't like, or someone's let you down, or a relationship has ended, or then if you don't accept it, then you won't be stuck with it. And in fact, the reverse is actually true. Mm-hmm. As soon as we accept things that we don't like, then we have the power to move on. And that is critical. Accepting something you don't like doesn't mean I wanted this. It means this is where I am, and now I move on to create what I want. Resilient people are flexible.
Yeah, I like that.
So it's like we say, I might even put it this way, resilient people have preferences. People who are not resilient, and even unhappy people, tend to live life in absolutes. I want it sunny, or I want everybody to be nice to me or respect me. I can't tolerate people being rude. And resilient people say, I have preferences. I prefer it to be sunny, but when it's raining, it's fine. If people are rude, I can deal with it.
Yes, I love that. I so resonate with the word preferences, and I think that we often don't take the time to consider preferences. My wife and I told you about our times together between Christmas and New Year's, where we evaluate our relationship, but we also evaluate what would be good, what would bring me meaning, fulfillment, happiness, contentedness. What would bring me into that, and what do I need to either stop, start, or continue, or adjust? And so we take a look at that, and then we just start listing out our preferences. As a matter of fact, last week, we had one flip chart of things we want to do in 2024. I just removed it from my wall. It has been hanging up, and not that I pay attention to it, I do a checklist on it, but I can't help but look at it every now and then. It just pops up at me. And so I'm reminding myself of seeking, I like your word preferences, seeking my preferences, my options, my opportunities.
Yeah. You're an extraordinary and disciplined and motivated man, Charlie. You inspire me.
Oh, thank you. It is likewise. I've got to tell you, and I want to go, I'm going to spend a bit of time on this acceptance, because it was, as I read in the book.
Break first.
Do we need a break? Are we at break time?
Yeah. I say break and then go to this.
No, I want to go to this one. I want to stay on this one.
Okay.
And then we'll go to the others. Has it really been that long? It feels like it's been a couple of minutes. Oh, man, Andrew. You helped me understand that the first thing I need to accept is myself. And I have been working on that. That's been a discipline I've been working on my whole life. But you gave me a window into it. Not just, and see, I have a very troubled childhood from until I was about 7.5 when I was adopted. I had a childhood of abandonment and rejection, and not physical abuse, but verbal abuse and those kinds of things that really brought me down. I got to a point where I accepted those things, and I could use those things, and I could use them as almost separate from me, but I use those experiences. Andrew, in talking to you, I came up with, I not only must accept those things that they happened to me, but they were indeed, now this is going to sound strange to everybody, but they were good for me. I live by a quote, you are who you have been becoming. That is part of my becoming. The very fact that I was neglected and abandoned creates in me a heart for people that are on the verge of being abandoned or neglected, the poor, the disenfranchised, the compromised, and that those circumstances were not they are me. So it's like accepting my full self and knowing that those circumstances, as with every other failure and difficulty and trauma, made me the man I am today, and not a bitter man, but a man that knows what hope is. You helped me so much in that.
I admire you, Charlie, for having dealt with that as you have, and I understand what you're saying, because the empathy that you have and what you've spent your life giving importance to and focusing on, a consequence of the life you had as a young boy. I was to expand on this, and I think this is important. People will sometimes say to me, do you have to love yourself? You have to at least like yourself. And here is why: because we create the life that we feel we deserve. And if we don't like ourselves, then we can be living in a place we don't like, where we're treated badly. We can be working in a job where we're treated badly. And we can keep habits that don't nurture our health or our well-being. And in the end, we say, it's only me. And we have to get to that point where we say, I like myself, because we do create the life that we feel we deserve.
That statement is so powerful. And I don't know that I had looked at it through that lens. And I think we do create the life we feel we deserve. And that feeling, so it's emotional. And for those in our post-Enlightenment culture that are so into science and data and fact, this is not a science and data and fact thing. This is a right brain. This is something that is almost unconsciously or subconsciously driving you. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about what I used to be, 40 years ago, for 7 years, I was in a very large church. I was minister to single adults, and I had 1,000 people in our group. We'd have 300 or 400 people each Sunday just listening to me jabber on. And I now still work with women in their 50s, 40s, 50s. When I say work with, they're friends of mine, and so I'm not counseling them in any way. We just chat. But so many that are so hopeless, that are single women and feel so hopeless, and then they say whenever they meet a man, they meet this same guy, this same jerk, and they're always dating or going after this same jerk. But isn't that right in what you're saying, Andrew?
Yeah, it's like they say, a woman said to me, I keep meeting the same guy in a different pair of trousers.
Yeah.
And I think, Charlie, you and I have both come across, particularly it seems, women or we, who are just such beautiful people and deserve so much better. And keep committing to relationships where they are not treated as they deserve to be treated. And the reason and the essence is they've never come to like themselves and say, I deserve better. And that is not to say that it's easy. And unlike you, Charlie, I was loved and nurtured growing up, although I understand intellectually that it's so important. I didn't have to bounce back like you have, but it remains critical that we like ourselves and say, it may not be perfect, but parts of me are excellent.
Yeah. And there's another thought that coincides with bouncing back And that is, I found this, I was doing a project where I just collected less than a page full of quotes from the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. And I don't know if you're familiar with his set of poems, but he talks a lot about time. And he talks about a lot about every beginning is an end, every end is a beginning. And then he says in one of so he's got 4 books in there. That's why it's called the Four Quartets. And he has one where he said, "There is no end, only additions." And that's a bouncing back. But if we look at that bouncing back, what if that bouncing back is really a bouncing forward? And it's really a continuum of what felt like an end and was a new opening, a new idea, a new concept, and a new hope. And do you know what I'm trying to say here?
Absolutely. And we might see it in terms of when we figure I've failed, or when we're disappointed, or we've let ourselves down. Obviously, there's a period of time when we come to grips with, okay, so this has happened and this may be the last thing that I wanted. But then that opens up that new beginning where we say, what do I learn from this? How will my next job interview, how will my next position, how will my next relationship be better based on what I've learned here? And that leads us into a theme of bouncing back, which is resilient people find purpose in whatever happens. And it's not naivety, it is just a way of being and a way of thinking that says, I choose not to see my failures as some kind of aberration.
They are me.
Yeah.
And I'm in the process of growing. There's a friend of mine wrote a book titled Beginning Again. And it was a book, I just love the title. Happened to be a book on divorce, and he was huge in divorce recovery. But life is, every day is a beginning again, is it not? And that is what we're doing. It's a new start.
And if we can see it that way, one of the second key to bouncing back that I talk about in the book is that resilient people take on life one day at a time. And I tell this story that...
Can I do a hold? We need to take a break, and that's my next... Right on my notes, my next thing to talk about is one day at a time. But let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back to that, because that's a critical subject. Yeah. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and I have with me author extraordinaire Andrew Matthews, who has, and every time I say these words, I'm shocked, and anybody that hears it is shocked, that he sold more than 8 million books. That's a country. That's incredible. And we are talking about his latest book, Bouncing Back, How You Rebound from Disappointment and Disaster. And he has 7 processes or 7 concepts that his book covers, and there's 7 chapters with an 8th sort of summary, but there's 7 chapters that tell about the 7 things. Today we're focusing on 3. The first one we just covered, accept what you can't change. Now the next thing that he and I decided we wanted to talk about is what he calls one day at a time. I'm an AA guy, so I get the one day at a time thing, but I'm sure you can enlighten me greatly on that.
Thanks, Charlie. If you were to gather together everything that you were going to need to eat over the next 5 years, and gather together all you needed to wear in the next 5 years, and you put it all in a big rucksack and you carried it around on your back, then we say what would happen? Pretty soon you'd collapse, because you're not designed to carry that kind of load. So we say, okay, what if you were to make a list of everything that you need to do in the next 5 years and everything that could go wrong in the next 5 years, and you carried that all around in your head, we say, how would you manage? And eventually you would probably collapse because you're also not designed to carry that kind of load. The point is this, that whether we're talking about what we need to eat or wear, or whether we're talking about what we need to manage, we can deal with life very well one day at a time. We can deal with 24 hours. And it's only when we start stretching that thought process way out into the future and say, what if, that we get into trouble. If we can just deal with life one day at a time, we say, I will do my best until bedtime and let tomorrow take care of itself. And we're perhaps never going to get 100% good at that, but the better we become at that, then the better our life gets. And in that context, we might remember, was it Mark Twain that said, I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened.
Yeah, I remember that. That's great. It's so good.
Yeah, so we bring our focus down into what is it that I can do today, what is it that most needs attention today. It's a little bit like if we're climbing a mountain and we get stuck on a ledge, then suddenly all our focus goes into getting ourselves off that ledge and to the next point. And the more that we can do that, then the better we operate.
I love that. As you were talking, something occurred to me that has never occurred to me about one day at a time. And as an alcoholic, I understand that concept very well, that we are sober one day at a time. We can't say, I'm going to be sober for the next 20 years. It's just say, yeah, I'm not drinking today. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but I'm not drinking today. And that fits in there. There's another element, though, that hit me that's a new idea, Andrew, for me, and that is I live in this world of mystical contemplative theology, and so it's a lot of something that is very big with me and with a handful of my friends. We call it the sacrament of the present moment. And that means to fully embrace ourselves in the present, in right now. So we're not thinking about what I'm doing in an hour, or especially not several days from now. You think about, what is it right now? What can I see, admire, adore? What can I grab? As you wrote, even in a prison cell. Didn't you write that? Even in a prison cell, that you can find things to focus on. Did you write that? Am I thinking of the right author?
I don't think it was. I wish I'd written it.
But anyway, you know what I was thinking? One day at a time. What, Andrew, what if we said, this day at this time?
Yes.
Not just one day at a time, but this day at this time, because this is the special day. This, right now, is the special moment. And if we could grasp that, then our life seems to go on forever, and we're going to find so much more joy.
Beautiful, Charlie. And I shared with somebody the other day that here's how life can often work. We're looking forward to, let's say we've got a dinner date this coming Friday. So we're telling ourselves, I'm looking forward to Friday, it's going to be great. And then, so we're not quite living in the moment, but there's this idea that Friday I'll be happy. And so Friday comes, and Friday evening comes, I get in my car, and there's a traffic jam, and suddenly I'm running late. So I'm saying to myself, I'll be happy when I get to the restaurant. And I get to the restaurant, my date's not there yet because she's in the jam. And now I'm lined up to get a table because I'm late. I'll be happy when I get a table. And then we finally get a table, and we'll be happy when they bring us the menu. And I'll be happy when we get the food, which comes later than we wanted it, so we're not happy. Then I take some photos of it and send it out on Instagram. And now I'll be happy if people like
if I get
my
the little
main
hearts
course,
on it.
they
yeah.
don't. And so it continues. And we just need to, as you say, we keep dragging ourselves back to the present.
Yeah.
Today is all I have, and who am I with, and what can I celebrate now?
That is so true. That's such a wonderful example of that date and of all those things that happen. And we get into this when I get, if only sort of thing. And I get whatever when I get and it just doesn't turn out that good. Most things, I wrote a blog on this, that most things are best when they're surprise. When you go on a vacation and you have no expectations. None. We just went on a cruise and I had zero expectations. Largely because I didn't think I was going to be that interested in the stops and what was going on. And because I had no expectations, it was wonderful because every good thing was a surprise. Every good thing was, and so that just added to the joy.
Absolutely. And there's another thing that I'd like to tease out of this one day at a time, and that is in terms of things that we're looking to achieve. I was speaking to a university in Hong Kong in 2005, and a fellow approached me. I'd been signing books for maybe a half an hour or so, and there was somewhat of a lineup. And the last fellow in line, I guess he got on the end because he said to me, I haven't got $20 to buy a book, but he said, can you tell me how to write a book? And I said, just write 1 page a day. And so I didn't remember who he was. And then about 3 years ago, I got an email from this fellow, Akash Karia. And he said, lined up to speak to you in Hong Kong in 2005. I didn't even have $20. I was a poor student. But he said, you gave me the best advice I ever got. He said, I've now written 16 books. And he said, I travel the world and I speak to corporations like Sony, and I teach them about making presentations, and I sell my books. And he said, it all happened because I suddenly understood that I could write a book by just writing 1 page a day.
It became part of his daily ritual, daily habits. I'm such a believer in habits and ritual.
Into little bits. And similarly, if we've got something that's really crushing that we need to manage. My sister Jane has a daughter who was terribly injured in a car accident in 2001, and I actually interviewed her on a coaching call, and because Anna has been unable to even eat or move, all she can do is blink. And so it's now 23 years since Anna's injury. And I asked her, I said, Jane, tell our listeners, how is it that you've managed this cross? And she said, firstly, we've been blessed. We've had a lot of help. And for that, my husband, Steve, and I are eternally grateful. But she said, we just manage 1 day at a time. And in the beginning, we went through all kinds of distress and trauma and wondering how our lives would ever turn out. But she said, 1 day at a time, we've managed it, and we've lived essentially a happy life. And she has 4 other children, which she's raised. And she said, that's it. We've lived life 1 day at a time.
Yeah, from that example you just gave, it makes me think that future thinking, I'm a future thinker. I'm a dreamer. We're going to talk in just a minute about imagination, and I'm filled with imagination. But if we put too much stock into our goals and our aspirations and those things, even if we're qualified for and they're very doable, we run that risk of missing today and missing. And it is also, if I'm really thinking 1 day at a time, I don't have a whole lot of worries unless I have to do something worrisome. Most worries are future worries. Oh, I've got this meeting next week, and I've got to start thinking about that meeting. And if you're living 1 day at a time, you're not thinking about that meeting. You're thinking about gathering and experiencing what you're doing that day.
Yeah, it's a question I asked myself, Charlie. How do we balance the two? Because clearly we become what we think about. And you don't improve yourself or your life by looking at who you are. You look at who you want to be. We're both agreed that it's critical to imagine a better life, but at the same time we balance that with focusing on enjoying our life today and feeling blessed today. And I believe that to the degree that we feel engaged and blessed and happy, so that feeling and emotion is the template for what we create tomorrow, and we create more of the same.
Wonderful. And thinking about creating for tomorrow leads us into the third that we're going to talk about, 7 in the book. We're talking about 3 principles for bouncing back. But thinking about tomorrow, our third thing we want to talk about is imagination. And I'll tell you, friend, you are really singing my song. So what is the place or the role of imagination in this process of bouncing back?
We become what we think about. And if you want to be more confident, if you want to have more money in the bank, if you want to have a job that you love, if you want to have a relationship that you love, then it all starts in your imagination. You have to see it in your mind before you can get it. And you have to see yourself as not only deserving it, but experiencing it. You see it as being the logical next step. I touched briefly on the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger, whom we all know. And as a kid in Austria, he had these dreams in his imagination. He saw himself as a bodybuilder on stage winning prizes. He saw himself in movies, and he saw himself as an American. This is when he's like 14, 15 years old.
Never heard that story.
And then if we look at what he achieved, and he got a business degree, he became governor of California, and he has a lot to say about the imagination because it has been the foundation on which he's built his life. I would say also this, Charlie, that sometimes if we're looking to change our life or even wanting to change a habit, we say to ourselves, is it willpower that I need, or is it a clear goal that I need? What is more important? And my understanding that those are useful, but neither of them are most important, because what's most important is how you see yourself. If you don't see yourself as being thin and fit, you can have a very clear goal, but if you don't see it, if you don't see yourself as being fit and healthy, then the clear goal is not going to get you there. And similarly, willpower is never going to triumph over a self-image that sees yourself as someone who you really don't want to be.
It ties strongly into the first one we talked about, is acceptance, and that is you make yourself the person you feel you deserve. If you create in your imagination the person you want to be, it seems to me that you can, if you do that regularly, and that's part of the process, that begins to become the person you think you deserve, rather than that the two fit really well together, don't they?
They do. And let's take an example, Charlie, that we're both familiar with. Let's take someone who would like to be comfortable speaking in front of a group. And when they even entertain that idea, they say, that's ridiculous because I've never done it. But then they begin to say, maybe it's possible, maybe I could learn how. And they begin to see themselves talking to small groups, and they begin to pay attention to what people do when they stand up to speak at a birthday party or in front of a small wedding. And then they start to study online a little bit about things you can say and things you don't say. And then they begin to see themselves more and more about being one of those people. And they move from a position of, that is ridiculous, I could never do it, to maybe it's possible, to, yes, I've done it once or twice and I didn't die, to, yes, I could do it a bit more like Charlie, I've seen him do it and he speaks well. And over a period of months or a year or two, that person moves from it's ridiculous to, yes, I can speak in public.
Yeah.
And it's something that almost seeps into our being by osmosis almost. But It's all dependent on how we see ourselves. And bit by bit, we become that person.
That is so powerful. It is. I love that idea of not just, it is imagining yourself, but it's such a real, visceral imagination that you see yourself like giving a speech. You don't only see yourself giving the speech, you feel yourself giving the speech. You feel the passion that there's a message that you want to say, and you identify with that message, and soon that message becomes you, and you become that speaker. It's brilliant. I love that, Andrew. Thank you. You know what I want to do? It's getting time to wrap up. I know my producer's going to start giving me the throat cutting thing. It's time to stop, but I never pay attention. I think you told me, I don't think this is a quote, I think you told me that people that write nonfiction books are often trying to solve their own problems. And I think that's so true. Yeah, it's so true, because that's what I write as nonfiction, and I'm really trying to fix my own problems. So I want to ask you, I'm going to get personal here. What problems are you trying to solve?
At age 25, I made a shocking discovery. I discovered that the happiest people I knew had bigger problems than me.
Mm-hmm.
And that made no sense, because I thought that as my life got easier, I would become happier. And then I discovered people who had gone broke or come through cancer, or even people who had lost loved ones way too soon. Often those people had more direction in their life and lived with more joy than I did, and I thought I need to find out how happy people think so I can think like them. Read about 200 books on happiness and attitude and success.
There were 200 books in those days on happiness?
Not on happiness. There were actually no books I can remember that had happiness in the title. But there were the books you might imagine, The Power of Positive Thinking, and How to Make Friends and Influence People. And there were other books about the power of the subconscious mind and so on. And when I got through those, I thought to myself, I've made some breakthroughs here. I've discovered some keys to happiness for me. I now need to write the book that I wished I'd had. And the book that I wished I'd had would be in simple language, with headings, and with lots of cartoons. So that was the book, Being Happy.
Where did the cartoons come from? Is that just because that was your skill and you said, I'm going to integrate this? Or did you see or feel something or hear something that says this would be good? Or is that just a unique concept that came to you?
When I quit a law degree, I studied classical drawing and painting, and I was actually working as a professional portrait painter, and I also had a private art school. Yeah, so I was teaching art as well. I had a little private art school, and I knew I could draw cartoons. I just wasn't sure if I could write a book.
And that's, what is it, 9 books later now, or 10?
We're up to 12. Yes.
Up to 12. So that's remarkable. You have a remarkable story, and I really want to encourage our listeners to bouncing back rings with you. This is the latest and the greatest, and that's what we've been talking about today. I will have Andrew's website and opportunities for you to read his books on the show notes. I just encourage everybody to find out more you can. And you've got just a boatload of videos, too, that people can look up, right?
Yeah, I've got lots of videos on YouTube. What I sometimes do, even with these chats, Charlie, I have a camera running, and if I say something I think might be helpful, I'll make a 30-second YouTube video and put it on YouTube and say, this is Andrew chatting with Charlie.
No kidding. We would be honored if you did that. Andrew Matthews, thank you for spending so much time with me today. It is a true honor, and thank you for saying that you would take a look at the pages that I've written. That's worth the podcast right now. Just that opportunity.
I'm delighted to, Charlie. I'm just so delighted that we connected. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful connection. And I also want to thank our listeners and everybody that has been tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.